It's time for another project on the Okanagan Valley Railway. Join me as I work on improvements, new scenery, etc. Hopefully, you will learn something and I will not injure myself. Train CP82 enters my train layout with two very Canadian looking engines. And in this article, I'll show you how you can convert an Atlas GP38 and a Pro 2000 GP30 to look much more Canadian. In recent years, manufacturers have been catering more and more to the Canadian model railroader with engines such as the GP38-2, Canadianized by Athearn, the SD40-2 by Bowser, and so on. But there are still quite a few engines out there that you still have to do a little bit of work on to make them look convincing as a Canadian locomotive. A number of years ago, I did an article in Canadian Railway Modeler, Train 18 Track 1, on how to do this project. Here's the two engines as they look right out of the box basically. They look great, they're well painted, but they're missing a couple key features that you see on Canadian locomotives. One of the main ones is that Canadian locomotives typically have or had the bell at the top where the lights typically are on the US engines, and the headlights are down lower in the lower hood. So let's get started on this project. So looking at the GP38, I found out that it had no light on the nose, but the frame had a notch where you could place the bulb. The GP30, on the other hand, had a headlight on the nose, but no notch. Is there a mall train manufacturer's conspiracy that I'm not aware of? Now with both engines, when you're detaching them, be very careful. With today's models, there are a lot of little intricate parts and they do break off very easily. So be very careful when you take apart the handrails and such. I use tweezers to detach the handrails. I believe there's 4 different locations around the cab to do so, and then the cab pops right out of the body. I left the front wire in for the cab area, so I still had number boards and cab lighting, but I also added another wire. This new wire would run to the groove that you can see in the picture here, and secured it in place with electrical tape, and that wire would power the new headlight in the nose. The wires connect to the circuit board with little black tabs. The next step was to kit bash the cab so it resembled a Canadian unit. I purchased a bell, headlight, and snow shields from Miniatures by Eric. The snow shields are optional depending on what unit you are modeling and how much detail you want to include. I was modeling number 3001, a GP38, which was servicing the Penticton area in the area that I'm modeling. Since my unit was already painted, I painted the parts in CP red prior to assembly. I started by removing the number boards. A pair of small needle nose pliers will do the job. I also removed all the cab windows to avoid damaging them. Carefully removed the headlight lens for the number boards. I wasn't so successful at this stage, but was able to find a suitable lens for the future nose headlight. The bell fits into the top hole left from the old headlight, as you can see in the picture. CA glue works best to hold the bell in place. For the nose, I used a prototype photo to figure out where the headlight would go. As you can see by the Proto photo, the headlight is recessed into the nose. With an X-Acto knife, I made a small 45-degree angle cut down from the top and the same from the bottom. I then used a small file to start filing the middle part until the headlight fits nicely into the notch, as seen in the picture here. The next tricky part is to drill small holes in the back of the headlight for the lens and holes in the nose. If you don't have a small enough drill bit, try using a heated needle and make sure you have the needle lined up before making the hole. I then glued the headlight to the nose and the lens from inside the shell. I made one other minor modification by moving the horn from the top of the cab just before the first of the 2 fans of the back in order to match the prototype. Once finished, I tested the engine to make sure the lights worked and then retested after carefully reassembling the shell. As seen in the picture, I now have a GP38 that closely matches the prototype. With the GP30, the kit bashing part was much easier as the headlight and lens already existed on the nose. All I had to do was remove the headlight and lens from between the number boards up at the top of the cab. I found removing the Proto 2000 GP30 shell easier than the Atlas GP38. It required removing the coupler screws and pulling the couplers and pockets out of the way. The next step was to remove 4 screws, 1 at each end and 2 in the middle, hidden by the fuel tank, which you had to pop off. I had to remove the weight as well and that required removing the 2 large screws right under the fuel tank. Getting rid of the headlight between the number boards and putting in the bell is virtually identical to the GP38 job. Once again, be careful removing the lens, but it's okay if you break it, as there already is one in the nose. Once again, the bell was made by Miniatures by Eric. The reason for removing the weight is now quite evident, since there is no groove on the weight towards the nose, as I mentioned before about the conspiracy, so I had to cut my own notch. Removing all the wires and everything in order to remove the weight was a tricky procedure. The main thing is to either remember or write down where everything went. I have to write everything down, what can I say? So you can reassemble without any issues. I use my hobby tool, or your Dremel tool, whatever you have, to cut the groove in the weight, as shown in figure 1. Make sure you wear goggles to protect your eyes and perform this operation away from your project to avoid getting iron filings where they don't belong. Once cut, it was just a matter of running a new wire through the groove and holding it in place with electrical tape. Now it's time for reassembling the weight and then the shell. Be careful with the wires. I inadvertently pinched a wire below the weight, which resulted in a short. I had to take everything apart again, but no permanent damage was done, thankfully. I tested them all to make sure the lights worked both before I replaced the shell and after. In the picture, it shows the GP30 looking like the prototype, and here's the prototype picture as well. I hope you enjoyed this segment. I found both these projects to be somewhat challenging, but well worth the effort, as both engines now have that Canadian flavor rather than an American engine painted in CP. And they look great on my train layout. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked what you saw and wish to see more content on model trains and real trains, please subscribe to my channel.